Welcome to Fort Wayne Up Close. I'm your host, C. Stats, with my co-host right here, Mr. E. Fikes. What's going on, E. Fikes?
What's popping, man? How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Now, we have a guest in the building, a guest that have lived a life here in Fort Wayne, a life that, he's seeing some progression, but in this present day and time, I'm sure he's seeing some regression in things that has happened in his life. But we're going to talk and get some perspective on a life lived throughout the city, throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s. Have we progressed? Have we regressed? Have we moved? Have we stayed stagnant? We have Mr. Charlie here. Mr. Charlie, introduce yourself to the people.
My name is Charlie Myatt. Born and raised in Fort Wayne, lived here all my life. Come from a great family, raised by my parents, both my parents. And, I've lived a lot. I've seen a lot.
Yes, sir. I want to get there. But there's two things when we want to get started out. One thing is, I want to talk about Fort Wayne as it is now. I heard that at one point in time, Fort Wayne was a busy city. It had a lot going on. You've seen that. What happened and when did it transition to where we are now?
Well, in the 50s and 60s, the black community had their own stores, hotels, doctor's office. They had a few bars and things like that. And most of the black people were employed by those institutions. And as time went on, when it changed, it was like 69. They built Eden Green and Greenfield Square.
Mm-hmm.
That tore down all the old neighborhoods.
Yes, I heard that.
Where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Where my family and my cousins and friends, we all lived in that area between Calhoun and Oliver, the railroad tracks, and Creighton Street. And that, not to say that black people didn't live in other places, they did. Right. They lived in Westfield. Mm-hmm. Danny, a friend of mine, Danny Nolan, he grew up on Dahlman, which is by Weiser Park. And there were, people living in areas, matter of fact, when I was a kid, most of the neighborhoods were integrated. White people lived across the street.
Really?
They lived down the street, around the corner. You know what I'm saying? And it was like that. Like I said, you could, I remember I worked a lot of jobs as a kid, because I'm going to tell you a story about my dad. When I turned 13 years old, my dad used to give me allowance, It started out as a nickel, a quarter. It got up to $1 and a dime. I don't know how he got to that mess.
That was a lot of money, though.
But it was $1 and a dime. And I'm 13 years old, which means it was like 1965.
Uh-huh.
My dad said, son, you're old enough to get your own money. And from that day on, I worked for my money.
And I want to talk about that, too. You mentioned a time that we don't see much anymore as mom and dad in a household raising children. And we don't see it in this time, and then you look at it, where dads are allowed to be dads. And I'm going to say that, where, we got to do this gentle parenting and things like that. Yeah. But tell us about the way your father brought you up and what he instilled in you.
My father and my mother were from Alabama.
Mm-hmm. What part?
My dad lived in Newbern. And my mom lived in Uniontown.
That's where my parents were from.
Yeah, and my parents was from. But guess what? They about 25 miles apart. But
yeah.
But see, in the 30s and 40s, 25 miles was a long distance. You either had to walk or get a mule.
Right.
Anyway, they met when they came to Fort Wayne.
Uh-huh.
Okay. They married in 1945. 44, 45. And my mom had two sons before she married my dad. And then my dad had a daughter before he married my mom. And then there was 6 of us mites.
Okay.
Between my mom and my and my dad.
Okay.
But we were all brothers and sisters, but no halves and all that kind of
Right, right.
Yeah.
You know, we were all brothers and sisters. And every evening, we sat at the kitchen table and ate as a family. Not one time, every evening. On Sundays, we ate in the dining room as a family. And we did that all through my life.
Wow. Yeah. And that's amazing that we don't see that anymore. We don't see that family, connection, because I'm going to eat at this time because I got to run. I'm going to eat at that. My kid's going to eat at that time. It's not that sitting down anymore. So you did mention that the neighborhood, and we've seen this before in many other cities and things, that they replace the black neighborhood with other entities. And you mentioned, as they were known at the time, as projects, Eden Green. What is it now? The Villages of Hannah. And I don't know, River something Terrace, I think.
The name has changed.
Yes. What is the name then?
Yeah,
Green in the square.
Yes.
When I was growing up, at that time, the grocery stores didn't have milk because they didn't have coolers. We had our milk delivered by the milkman. We had laundry service. And we had an ice box. The iceman would come with this big old block of ice and throw it in the ice box. We didn't get our first refrigerator, I think, until I was about maybe 5th or 6th grade. We got our first refrigerator, And my mom used to wash the clothes in one of them old-fashioned agitated washing machines with this thing on the top that you
screen.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to have one of those.
And she would hang them outside. We didn't see back then. Like I said, we had neighborhood stores. The store was a couple blocks from the house. I grew up, Link Chapman lived on Hannah Street. And he was a mentor to me as I was a kid. And I used to do odd jobs and work for him, you know what I mean? And like I said, I was talking about Mrs. Kemp earlier. Billy Kemp. She taught me so much about life. We called her Aunt Billy. She lived 2 blocks from the house. And she taught me etiquette, how to use a typewriter. And she mentored me in politics. Because she worked at GE, but she used to do parties for wealthy people. And so, and she did bookkeeping. You remember Henry Gaines, the construction guy?
No, I don't.
Anyway, she did his books and other people's books. And like I said, she mentored me in politics. In 1968, I became a precinct committeeman.
Wow.
And I was a precinct committeeman during the Levinoff administration. I went to several state conventions as a delegate. I got a well-rounded upbringing.
Well, that's good. And with all of that, because I'm picturing the life that you said in the early 50s and 60s, where we're in the neighborhood, everything's good, we got our black people on in this, but we still can live with, integrated communities. It didn't sound like it was much trouble. But why are we here where we are today? When did you see the transition?
It transitioned in the 60s. I'm going to tell you why. The white people who had daughters, if they wasn't going to leave, they was going to have some black babies. and that's true.
And it's funny, but sadly, it is possibly true. And that was a fear too, right?
Yeah. So they started moving out. And also in the mid 60s, Zauner Corporation, Zauner Pistons, Fred Zauner, he all the factories at that time were making money off government contracts because of Vietnam. You know what I'm saying? So they had, the government so they had to hire some black people.
Right.
I think in 1964, maybe 2 blacks that worked as owner.
Really?
Yeah. And in 1969, when I hired in full time, there was probably about 60 or so, and it got up to be 100, but it never got to be more than 100.
Oh, wow.
But you got to understand, Zonda is only a factory of about 1,200 people. That includes, everybody,
Right, the
engineers,
office workers,
everybody,
yeah.
so 100 black people. But at that time, a lot of them came through there, but some of them left and went to the harvester. Some of them got fired. Some of them quit.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I ended up working there 33 years and retired with my pension. But it wasn't. I was a wild child. My dad passed away in 1969 of cancer. And now I'm the oldest one at home. My older brother was just getting out of college. He went to Purdue as a freshman in 1963. There was only like about 3 or 4 black people on campus in Lafayette in 1963. But my brother was a hell of a guy. He was a straight A student. You understand? I remember in high school, I went to Central. In high school, I had to follow my brother. What the hell?
Big shoes to fill?
Hey, I'm telling you, he was a straight A student. I wasn't bad. I was an AB student, you know what I mean? Like I said, I went to school, played sports, and I worked. My dad instilled a work ethic. Me and my younger brother, we shovel snow in the wintertime. We cut grass in the summertime. We help people clean out their basements, and we get pop bottles and milk jugs, and you know how we got the milk jugs. But anyway, that was our hustle.
Right. Well, something I want to say about 2 weeks ago, I was cutting my yard, and I remember back in the day we used to go around with lawnmowers, cutting grass and doing shoveling snow. I just got them cutting my grass. 2 young boys riding down the street. It's like, do you got some work? They had their lawnmower, and I'm sitting there like, oh, if y'all would have came about 30 minutes earlier, I would have gave y'all to cut my yard. But you don't see that kind of effort or hustle or grind in this time of age.
No. See, when I was a young man, young teenager, preteen, we had a push mower. We didn't have no gas mower. And if the grass was tall, we knocked it down with a sling blade, and then we rig it out, and then we cut it.
Oh, y'all was doing work.
Yeah, that was work.
That's how we cut the grass.
That was work.
My dad would keep it sharp. My dad was a guy who was illiterate, basically. He could write his name, but he could count his money, and he instilled that work ethic in us. And so, I'm out there, getting mine. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I worked for a man named Willie Wilson. I worked for Mrs. Kemp's husband, Billy Kemp's husband. And I also got a good street education in summertime. Because I'm out with Mr. Kemp. And we out there, Mr. Kemp sold uniforms to nurses and shoes, and to the waitresses in places like Regals and places like that. And he made name tags, and he sold like matchbooks and calendars and.
So he was an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And he, but he was a small man. He had a lot of illnesses, and I carried the sample cases because he couldn't carry them because they was heavy. And I carried the sample cases, and we'd be out at night. As long as I was Mr. Kemp, it was okay. I knew all the hustlers. I knew all the pimps and whores. You understand? Because I was around them at night with Mr. Kemp. And so I got a good street education also.
Yeah. But you got a balance of it.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like only doing that during the summertime when school was out. When school was in, I'm still working for Mr. Wilson at the laundry, cleaning the laundromat and doing the doctor's offices. I'm still doing that. You know, a lot of times I would clean Dr. Marshall and Dr. Wilson's office on my way to school for football practice.
Yeah. You know, and I want to ask, because you've seen this and you've seen the evolution and you've seen things. And you say in the late 60s is when you noticed a change. But when did the parenting in not only the family being broken up, but we stopped instilling ethics and morals and things in our children?
When the
change?
government started giving mothers money for having babies. And then there was no fathers in the homes. Now, even when I was a young teenager, there were single mothers in our neighborhoods. But the uncles and the fathers would mentor to that single mother's children.
Right.
You understand? And it's like when it got to be babies having babies and no fathers in the home, that's when the home dynamics deteriorated. You understand? Because I remember there was a time, if you had 9 kids and you put them on your tax returns, you got thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
See, now you can only claim 2.
Yeah.
You
Or
know?
get the credit for 2. You can claim them all, but you only get the credit for 2 or something like that.
You can only claim 2 to get money off.
Right.
You know, because, women used to sell their babies, Social Security numbers to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question. What would be the best advice you would give someone about life?
Put God first. Honor your parents and your grandparents. See, I grew up with parents that I didn't know my grandparents. They died before I was born. But I had great uncles and great aunts. You understand? They were like my grandparents. And and the family, people from Alabama, we had been through the struggle. My grandparents were born slaves. You know what I'm saying? My father was born in 1906. My mother was born in 1916. I didn't have no young parents. You understand? And so, but we had that dynamics. Like I said, my dad bought this house in 44. My brother was born in 45. I was born in 49, and then the rest of them followed. But during that time, my dad, they rented out the upstairs and the back room. Mr. Marks lived in that back room probably about 15 years. He worked at the Harvester. He's also an usher at our church. And then there's a lot of people that came through that upstairs. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, did you know Janie Hunt? Okay. Janie Hunt was an entrepreneur. She built a nursing home out there on Evard Road.
Oh, wow.
She had foster children. She built $1 million home out there off of Tonka Road, 25 acres. It was like 2 houses in one. Because she lived on one floor and the kids lived on the other floor.
Wow.
She got children from the crib, raised them up, sent them to college. Janie Hunt she was my dad's first cousin. She was look her up,
Yeah, and we don't have that anymore. As E said, giving advice, that's good. But what needs to change? I know we can't go back, but are there some things that could be reinstituted that could, make a change or different in our community?
Well, first of all, we got to stop having these young men making these babies and not taking care of them. Even though you may not marry that woman, but you must stay in the child's life.
Yes, I always say that. I agree with that.
And you must put some values in that child.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? See, now, they They give them a computer or an Xbox,
Mm-hmm.
and they raising themselves.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And when I was growing up, we had a TV. One of the first ones in the neighborhood, matter of fact. But you know, we didn't watch TV through the week except in the evening because my dad, whatever he watched, that's what we watched.
Yes.
And I remember on Saturday nights, my mother would be frying my sister's hair, getting them ready for church.
Right.
And we watching Gunsmoke and Bonanza and shows like that.
Uh-huh.
And my mom would be baking a cake. The smell in the house was hair and cake. On Sunday mornings, my dad sent my mom and my sisters to the church in a cab. And me and my brother and my dad, we walked. Because the church was only 6 blocks from the house. But he wouldn't let my mother walk. He sent her in the cab. At that time, the cab was 50 cents from our house to the church. And the cab from Calhoun and Wayne Street to our house was 50 cents. Matter of fact, the cab come and said, we send more cabs out to y'all than anybody else. I said, ain't you in the cab business? You know, you ought to be glad we
Right.
taking these cabs.
Right.
Matter of fact, I ended up, I think I was laid off from Zoners in 71, I think. And I drove cab for a year. You know what I'm saying?
But you mentioned, and I do agree with the TV and the screen time, and I think we waste a lot of time and parenting time by giving children these screen things and everything like that. And you said they're raising themselves. But I remember a time we were called latchkey children, where my mother went to work, but she set the rules. She's like, you don't open my door, don't answer my phone.
Hey.
What happened to, the actual parenting part of, and that's what I'm wondering, where do we lose the parenting part to our children?
Younger mothers, grandmothers being 30 years old. You know what I'm saying? They don't have any upbringing. They wasn't taught anything. So their kids and grandkids that haven't been taught anything. You know what I'm saying? When I was a kid, every adult in the neighborhood could chastise you.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And see, I grew up with a dad who didn't play.
Mm-hmm.
You know. We didn't get many whippings. You know. My mom did most of the whipping. If my dad did the whipping,
Oh, it's on.
it's on. he like roots.
I might have to show up at your dad's house.
He like roots. You didn't want him to do nothing to you.
Yeah.
I remember one time, me and my brother, we in the bathtub. He had one of them old iron high-legged bathtubs, so we in there playing. We sliding down, and we couldn't have been no more than maybe 6 and 8 or 9 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We got water all over the floor, all over the ceiling. And my dad shaved with a straight razor. So he put that
strap.
He put that strap on us on that wet body. We never did that again. It's like his whoopings were few and far between.
Right.
But they were intense, and he meant it. And
It taught you so.
yeah, not to do that no more.
Whatever we did, we're not doing that. No more.
You know the sad part about it, because I work for an agency that now would deem that as, abuse or anything. But I understand the chastising, and I think a lot of, the chastising, the discipline that has been taken out of the parents' hand has also been detrimental to our community.
Of course it is. When I was in grade school, shit, the principal would tan your butt if you acted up. You know what I'm saying? He had that big old wooden paddle, and you would get about 4 or 5 licks. Then he send you back to your room. If my mom found out, then we gonna get 10 licks. We got home. I remember grade school. I had on some brand new corduroys. There's a little neighborhood store right there on the corner of Lafayette and Masterson. I came out there and I'm standing in the curb. I'm standing in the street because I should have been on the sidewalk. Car hit me, man, and and it didn't hurt. I mean, it wasn't that bad.
Mm-hmm.
He bought me a bag of candy I went home, and my mom beat my ass 'cause I got them corduroys, dude.
She didn't care about you getting in.
Well,
That come later.
you're not dead, right?
But I'm gonna tell you.
You got them brand new corduroys dirty. You know how hard it is to get dirt out of corduroys.
But I think, and your stories are so authentic. They're so real and they're so genuine. But I think a lot of what we're missing is the value of things. It wasn't about the corduroy. It was about that she told you to value the, and I don't think we value
and being
things.
in the street,
Yeah.
standing in the street instead of being up on the curb.
Right.
Anyway, like I said, we ate as a family every day. We would sit around and discuss the day. How your day went, what you do today, how was school. My mom never missed a parent-teacher meeting. You know what I'm saying? And when we was in high school, she was always, my dad had passed away in 1969, and I still had siblings in high school. We went to Central. And let me talk about Central for a minute.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Central High School, everybody think it was a black high school. It wasn't.
That's the perception.
That's
Because
the perception, yeah.
you hear every black person came out of Central High School.
Because the black kids played football and basketball.
Uh-huh.
And there was a few white people but Central High School also had rifle club, tennis club, golf club. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
We had all those things. And usually the white students gravitated toward that.
Right.
But Central High School was like maybe 55-45 white.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But, they lived in this Lewis Street. And when I was a kid, like I said before, they tore down the neighborhoods.
Uh-huh.
Creighton Street was the boundary.
Mm.
I heard that.
Lewis Street was the boundary.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And Pontiac Street was out of bounds. You better not get caught up there after dark.
Really?
Really. Weiser Park was a white park.
Really?
Yes. Oxford Street was definitely out of bounds.
Really?
Macmillan Park was a white park.
Really?
Only time you went out there was for the fireworks. You better not be caught out there after dark.
Mm.
They ran you on. We had Memorial Park. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't have, like I said, Weiser Park wasn't, There was a city councilman, his name was Staggerwall. He lived on Hannah Street. His house still standing across from Weiser Park. You know what I'm saying? And like you said, it's like we had a hardware store and a pharmacy, and Doc Haynes was up on Hannah.
Hannah, yeah, Haynes, yeah.
Dr. Hayes. And, but, like I said, you wasn't welcome on Creighton Street or Pontiac Street.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And that's just how it was.
Wow.
People think that, those are our streets. They wasn't back then.
Because the funny part about it, I grew up on Oxford. Between Oxford and Rudisill.
Yeah.
I grew up in there. Weiser Park was my part.
Well,
Macmillan Park was my part.
But you're talking about the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the 60s.
80s and 90s, yeah. That was my stomach ground.
Yeah, I know. By then it started to change. Because, when they built those apartments, black people had to go somewhere.
Right.
So they just moved a little further east and west.
Right.
South.
Right. And then the flight came, as you said earlier, because I know at one point Gary suffered from that white flight is when, they moved to the suburbs. And as you so eloquently stated, if they had stayed, there would have been more integrated children than they were willing to have.
And that's another thing. If you look around today, there's a lot of integrated children.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Especially out there at Heritage and,
Yes.
and Carroll and Leo. Because guess what? When they built General Motors,
Uh-huh.
you know what I'm saying? Those families moved into where Heritage
Yes.
and those schools are, and they
Yeah, they sure
and
did.
they black sons
Yes.
married white girls,
Uh-huh.
and that's why we got all these mixed babies.
Yes.
You understand? And it is funny because I be in like I can't think of his name right off the band. You know, you be in there and these farmers with these bib overalls, and they got they little grandbabies mixed race. But guess what? Them the only grandchildren they ever gonna have.
Mm.
So they love them.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So they learned the children is what's changing the perception
Yes. I can
of
see
racism.
that. I can say that.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because a lot of these black athletes they go off to college.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And they meet these young ladies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so you're always going to gravitate toward your eco side. You know,
Mm-hmm. Where you are, you adapt to your surroundings.
yeah.
Yes.
So that's why you end up. If you look at pro athletes today,
Mm-hmm.
most of them have. I'm talking about the black pro
Right.
athlete. Most of them have black wives,
Mhm.
but I could say 30-40% have white wives
Yes, that's true.
because they met Charles Barkley with his bald headed ass.
From Leeds, Alabama. He from Leeds, Alabama.
So he got him a white girl.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because when you grow up in the South, and Jim Crow,
Uh-huh.
I got a Jim Crow story. I was 10 years old in 1959. My brother and my sister-in-law, they took me down to Alabama. We used to go down on the farm, me and, Dee McKinley.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Dee McKinley is my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Her grandfather raised my mother and
Oh,
her
okay.
3 brothers and their cousin and Dee's dad,
Okay.
And me and Dee's brothers, we'd all be on the farm in the summertime. You know what I'm saying? We all down there running around barefoot having a ball.
I've been
But
there.
we
I've been
kids, you
there.
know what I'm saying? But anyway, we jumped in the pickup. Now we ain't, they did have a brace of mules, Anyway, today we in the pickup with my great uncle,
Uh-huh.
Dee's grandfather. We all in the back, me and her 5 brothers, and we go up. We go up to this house because my great uncle was a sharecropper.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about straight out of Gone with the Wind,
Mm-hmm.
with these big ass marble columns
Pillars,
and
yeah.
everything. Anyway, we come out of there. We're on our way back to the farm, and we stop at this little roadside store, and it's got one of them old Coke machines with the lift up lid,
Uh-huh.
and it's got 2 water spouts coming out of it.
Uh-huh.
So my cousin, they ran to one side, so I'm gonna go to the side ain't nobody on. They said, no, man. I looked and said white only.
Mm.
And I looked up the lid, it's the same water, it just came out of 2 different spots.
Mm.
Anyway, and on the way down there, I think we stopped in Tennessee for gas. I just go in the bathroom and said, gentlemen, 'cause I'm from Fort Wayne.
Right. You didn't know the difference.
Yeah. They told my brother, said, man, you went in the wrong one. What? I wouldn't have one said men's room. It was a nasty, filthy hole. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
I wish I should have went and looked to see what ours looked like. They probably looked better than what theirs was because we was respectful and everything. Anyway, and the grocery store, I think it was down in Uniontown or somewhere, they had a stripe down the middle of the store.
A stripe.
A
In the
stripe
middle of the
on
store.
the floor.
Oh, wow.
And black people, white people bought the same stuff. Black people had to pay 10, 15% more for it. Same exact stuff.
Sadly, that's a practice today. We just don't know it.
Yeah.
Sure, right.
They took the stripe down, but it's in the neighborhoods where they pay for it. Mr. Charlie, we're going to have you back again, man. Your stories are so authentic. Your stories are so real. But I want you to just give our community some advice. What can help our community from the time that you've seen everything? What can we do to improve our community or to get our community back on track?
Well, first of all, like I said, put God first. Learn to respect your elders, you know, and try to learn from them, you know. Yeah. Because, like I said, I grew up with some great people, my aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles. But, you know, we come from the generation of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? Now, with all this IT and working from home, and, you know, it's not that many people that work with their hands like I did.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying?
That's a lost art, and we need to get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, even though I worked as a owner, I can run every machine in the plant. Not only could I run them, I could set them up and fix them.
Yeah.
I learned that.
That technical
I was
skill.
a master machinist.
Yes, that technical work.
But I learned that through my years of working there.
Yes.
You know, I remember when what's that CNC machine came in. You know, I didn't want to learn it because I knew I wasn't going to be. When I left there, I was never going to work in a factory again.
Right.
You know, and I didn't. And so why should I put in? Oh, I'm gonna tell you how dirty it was. It used to be your seniority got you any job in the plant.
Yes.
Job would be up for bid. If you had the seniority, you got the job.
Right.
You know, around the 70s and 80s, they changed it. Now you got to have an application. You understand? And you just can't automatically get that job. Whereas before, you could get any job with your seniority. Now, you got to put in the application, and they got to approve it for you to get a journeyman's card or electrician card or something like that, you know.
Yeah. Well, again, Mr. Charlie, we could be here all night, but I don't want to keep you out all night. But I want to tell you, we're going to have, because I've learned a lot, just the dynamics of what Fort Wayne used to be. I just thought Fort Wayne was always the way it was. I didn't live through the separation or the segregation of Fort Wayne. And we didn't think that it was that bad up here. You know, we thought segregation was just a South thing, but we didn't get taught that it was just as bad up here. So you educated me this evening, and I want you to come back because you have a whole lot of knowledge, you have a whole lot of wisdom, and I know you have a whole lot to share with us. This won't be your only time with us. We're gonna have you back again.
One thing I want to leave with you: integration was the worst thing that happened to black people.
Ooh,
that's a working thought. Yes, I'm not going to disagree with you.
Working thought. Huh?
I'm not going to disagree.
That was the worst thing that ever happened.
How many times I said that?
As a people, integration was the worst thing that ever happened to us. Before that, we had our own stores, our own hotels, all that.
Yes.
Now they tore down where the hotels and all those things where they tore them down, and put in those apartments.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And
that's a history. We're gonna have to go back and bring that up. That's why I said it's working thought. Yeah, I'm not gonna discredit, but I agree with that. But hey, you're gonna come back and educate us some more, Mr. Charlie. Please do not be a stranger. Hey. I appreciate you being here because again,
I got a lot more stories.
You have enlightened me, and that's what I want to hear.
I got a lot more.
We need to hear those
because I lived it. Yeah, I lived it,
and you've enlightened me on some things. But we'll have you back. But we thank everybody for joining us for this Fort Wayne Up Close with Mr. Charlie. He given us a whole lot of things that happened in his lifetime that he's seen to change and things that could help us get back on track. And we thank you, and we ask you to continue to watch us as we grow. But before we leave our people, what do we always say to them?
Always protect your mind.